The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry we're a couple minutes late getting started. We were having some technical difficulties. Welcome to the Database Administration Virtual Chapter. We have an interesting presentation coming up by Aaron Nelson. I'm Sharon Dooley. I'm going to be the moderator today. And just do some introductory material, and then I'll turn it over to Aaron. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Dell Software. That's who makes it possible for us to have raffles for you at these meetings, and we're very grateful to them for their support. If you're not familiar with SQL Saturday, it's a free one-day training event. It's always on Saturday, and there's going to be one somewhere near you. They're all over the place, and I urge you to check them out. You may have to pay $10 for lunch. That's the only thing you will ever be asked to pay. There's still time to sign up for the Business Analytics Conference. It's coming April 20th in Santa Clara, California. And if you haven't signed up, we will give you a chance to save $150 off the registration by using the code BAVCDB. Summit is not all that far away, October 27th through 30th, and we have a discount code for that. You'll save $150, VC15, F like in Frank, P like in Peter, S like in Sam, 6. And if you use our code for the DBA Virtual Chapter, we will get one free Summit Pass for every 10 registrations using this code. And we'll raffle these off over the course of the summer. So help us to give people free passes for the Summit. Use our code. We are one of many virtual chapters, and there are all sorts of different ones. You can sign up for those that you're interested in at www.sqlpass.org. PASS is an entirely volunteer organization. We have, there's paid staff in the headquarters, but everything else is done by volunteers, and you can just sign up, indicate the level at which you want to commit time. Each month there's an Outstanding Volunteer Award, and every year at the Summit they give the Passion Award to a volunteer who has made a significant contribution to PASS and its global data professional community. You can stay involved. It's a free membership. If you're not already a member, please join. It's a very valuable resource for you. And now I will turn the presentation over to Aaron Nelson, who's going to show us some performance tuning basics. He's a senior SQL Server architect with over 10 years experience in all areas of SQL Server. He was recently awarded a Microsoft MVP for SQL Server, and He has a lot of different certifications. He loves kayaking, but he's terrible at it, and so he sticks to databases most of the time. And he is involved with running the PowerShell virtual chapter and volunteers for the Atlanta local chapter. And he also co-runs the Atlanta PowerShell user group and helps organize SQL Saturday events in Atlanta. And now I'm going to, with any luck, make Aaron the presenter and let him do his thing. And we'll take questions at the end. Aaron, you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, thank you. Start that again. All right, so as Sharon was saying, I'm Aaron Nelson. I recently received actually my 5th Microsoft MVP award for SQL Server. Really excited about that. Glad they decided to have me back for one more year. Today I have cobbled together a bunch of information on performance tuning basics, as I like to think about it. Just places to get you started. You can dive in much deeper from here, but here are some things I want to call some people's attention to. If you're new to performance tuning or you do performance tuning occasionally, and when you go back to it you may forget a lot of the little things, or maybe just some of the little things in certain different areas. Hopefully this will jog your memory a little bit in some areas. So it's definitely not supposed to be an in-depth performance tuning session, but just to give people a good amount of information, good amount of resources, and hopefully get them a little further down the line and get through some problems. All right. So real quick, just to tell you about myself, I'm a consultant for SolidQ. SolidQ is a global provider of technology consulting, training, and we also have a product called Flex Services. Here's a slide about our company. You can read more if you like. We do, SQL Server, pretty much everything about it. Even more fun. Oops, forgot to edit the slide. One of my coworkers, Itzik Ben-Gan, is going to be doing a presentation next month, May 5th, and the exact same session again on Thursday, May 7th. The address for it is solidqus/webinars. Unfortunately, I forgot to put that in there. He's doing, I forget if it's a 60 or 90-minute session, but it's a free webinar on as it says, nudging the optimizer in the right direction. For this session today, I'm not going to be doing a ton in the way of like performance tuning T-SQL. I'm just going to be looking at other stuff that I run into frequently as a consultant, and thought it would be useful to share with everyone. A minute for next slide to update. Okay, so one of the first things I want to talk about is checking your error log. Sometimes it's something I find a good amount of people forget to do. I forget to do it from time to time. I might have something going on that I can't figure out why something's happening, and I, without opening the error log, I won't know for sure whether something is happening that wasn't happening before and I just don't know about it now. So checking your error log is a great first step in troubleshooting, because you want to make sure things are running properly before you move forward into trying to tune something or try and rearrange the way some code is laid out or something, because it might just be something that's as simple as a memory module has gone bad and needs to be replaced, and there's a note in the error log about it, or maybe one of the hard drives has gone bad, or 100 other things. So it's great to check your error log ahead of time. There's some tools out there that'll monitor the error log for you and then send you, snippets about it. I have been using SQL PSX, among other tools, to check my error log for years now. There's plenty of other ways to do it. This is just one of the ways. I'm really fond of PowerShell, so I figured I'd just spend 1 minute real quick at the beginning showing you a cool thing that you can do with PowerShell. With SQL PSX, if you go ahead and download that, and there's a module called SQL Server. If you go ahead and load that module up, import module, SQL Server, then you can, it comes with a function inside of there, and functions in PowerShell are almost kind of like stored procedures in SQL Server. A function is a pre-written piece of code that you call by name, and you can pass it parameters. So a lot of similarities to a stored procedure in SQL Server, although obviously functions in PowerShell aren't going to come with execution plans and things like that. So I'll actually jump on over and I'm going to jump over to my PowerShell section real quick and hopefully show you a very simple piece of code. Alright, bump it up just so it's a little easier to look at. Larger. Hopefully that's easy for people to see. Now once you've downloaded SQL PSX and you've got it set, in this case you'll want to import module SQL Server, and then you can use a function there called get SQL error log, and then you need to tell it which SQL server you want to look at. In this case I'm just going to look at my local machine, and then I'm going to use it's really a cheat, but it's called out-grid view, and that by saying out grid view, that's going to allow me to see it in a pop-up window, and then I'm going to be able to sort and filter it. So let me just back up a second before I do that. I'm going to go ahead and run this. And let me bump down the text size, because otherwise you won't be able to see the messages all that well. Try that one more time. There we go. That's a little better. In fact, let me just go ahead and do this to clear output. There we go. That's more like being able to read an error. So I've used this function, gave it a machine name. Now I've just starting out basic here. Obviously, I'm using my local machine. I could have called a different SQL server, or I could flip through a list of SQL servers and I could go get error information from all of them. I've got this here. You can see it right now. One of the features that I like about it is the fact that I can put a where filter on it. So if you look at this second piece of code here, the highlighted portion is what I'm going to run. And I'm going to say the same thing as I did in the one before, but now I'm going to say I want to look for the word port inside of the error message. So inside of one of these lines, I want to look for that word port, and I only want to see error messages that have that. Went ahead and ran it, and very quickly gave me all the messages where it had the word port, whether port was part of another word, like report server, or whether port was the word itself. It allows you to hone in on that and filter the list very quickly. You can also look for other things like error, warning, whatever you want to look for. There's quite a few messages that it's good to go look in the SQL Server error log for. And one other way using this method to get it, instead of just putting it out to text here, which is not, I mean, it's useful, but you might be looking for something and not know exactly what you're looking for. You're just looking for something that jumps out at you. So I'm going to go ahead and run this one more time, and I'm going to use the out grid view this time. And I'm actually going to have to switch over now and this one. Sorry for the lag delay here. There we go. The reason I'm bringing this up is out grid view is one of the coolest things ever. If you think of when you've got your query and you're in Management Studio and you run a query, and then you've got a bunch of rows, and you actually want to just like, you almost want like Excel kind of functionality on the result set that's in the grid in SQL Server. Well, this one can give you it. It can give you when it returns a query, or when, in this case, we're looking through the error log file. So if we wanted to look for the word port, we just type it in. You see we get that same list like we did just a second ago. We can look for another word error. We can look for you know, whatever we think we might need to do, might need to be looking for, and we can, when we click on text, you can see that we can actually sort it. This might not be the best demo, but as far as showing you that you can do it, but you can click on text and it sorts. You can see it right there, the little arrow, and then you know, just put in another one, another term. So I just put in database, and now it gave me all the messages that have the word database somewhere in there. That's it for that one, and I just have one last PowerShell one for you before we switch off. So just switch it to the right one. Okay, looks like it popped up. Alright, so one last way to do it, if you don't want to use the SQL PSX, you don't have it installed, there's another way to do it. You can say get child item, and you can point it at the log directory. Now in this case, I'm pointing it at the Microsoft SQL Server log directory. But one of the things I want to point out is obviously this could be pointed at a log directory of an application maybe that you're having an issue with, and you want to sort through the log there. In this case, I want to look for all files that start with error log, have a dot, and then either end with you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, something, or just have error log. And so it's going to filter that down for me. So I'm just going to do real quick before I can do that. I'm going to shrink this up. I'm looking at that directory, and I've got tons of files in there. I'm going to go ahead and add on that filter, as I mentioned. I'll go ahead and clear that out for Trey real quick. And it slimmed it down quite a bit. I can do the sort function. Sort's going to allow me to sort, you know, basically in order by, and then I can sort on anything. I'm going to look at the last write time, and I'm going to say select the first one. So basically I'm going to say give me the most recent file, and then I'm going to say get contents, which means give me the contents of the file, and go ahead and do that. Boom, there we go. There's my log file. And I could do, if I wanted to, I could put that out to the out grid view, like I had said before. Don't have to, but it is possible. This particular one, sorry, I see the trunk gets too small. This particular one could really come in handy if you're trying to look through an error log that isn't your SQL Server error log and you don't have another tool to parse through it. So I wanted to point this out in case it comes in handy. Hopefully it helps at least one person out there. And go back over to my slides. Alright, hopefully that'll project here in a second. Alright, so it's in here. Now on to SQL Server and staying inside of SQL Server. I love file groups. They help a lot. And they can simplify things, they can really help you test things. So you can isolate a table, isolate a set of tables, move it to different storage, see if your storage is fast enough. You can do quite a few things with file groups, and they're extremely useful, and I think people should use them. So just to make sure everyone's on the same page, we'll go over the extreme basics of it. So with a database in SQL Server, we've got data files. You've got an MDF file, you have one of those, and you can add additional .mdf files. You can have these MDF files be part of the primary file group. You always get primary file group when you start up a session in SQL Server, or when you start up a database. You can add additional ones. You could call it secondary, you could call it Bob, you could call it Teresa, you can call it whatever you want. You can put one or more files into that file group. And then there's obviously the log file that you're bound to be familiar with, the LDF. You should only have one of those per database. In some more extreme scenarios, you could have a second one just as an emergency in case it really overflowed the amount of data in the log file and you spilled it onto a completely different disk in the event that the disk fills up. But outside of that, just having one log file is the easiest way to go forward. You don't get any gains, any performance gains by having that second one. So the primary file group, like I said, you always get that with SQL Server when you start up a new database. All your system objects are there, and if you don't tell it otherwise, your tables are going to go there. So at the end of a create table statement, if you script one out and then just right-click, script a new window as create, it'll say down at the bottom probably on primary, and that's the default. You could create another file group called secondary, point it to a different file, and say create the table on secondary, and then it would put it on that other file. When you put it on, if you put a table on to a different file group, the metadata about that data is still going to reside in the primary data file. So it's basically the description of the table, like the sysobjects information about it. And then the rows and everything else are going to show up in your user-defined file group. There's also file stream file groups, and we're not going to get into that today. Some important points to know about having more files. They tend to help in several different ways. It can help you with free space. It can help you manage your free space better. If you have something that is constantly, like an import table that is going from 0 rows to 10 million rows and then back to 0, it can be beneficial to put that into its own file group from a performance standpoint for loading the rows so that they don't slow down access to the other tables, as well as it's not trying to skip around, and as far as fragmentation goes, you're not constantly fragmenting your data file potentially. I'm not going to do a super deep dive on this. This is, again, just basics to get you acclimated with it. If you're not using file groups and you've got over 100 gigs worth of data in your database, and especially if one of those tables is more than 10% of your entire database, it might be a good idea to investigate file groups and see if you can get some performance gains or get rid of some contention or something like that. Spreading the files across, whether it's one file in a file group or taking the different file groups and putting them across different disks, it's going to get you better I/O bandwidth. So definitely something you should take a look at seeing if you can do it. Some of the advantages of doing multiple file groups is that you can have a read-only file group. So you could put if you've got 10 years worth of history, you could put, say, 7, 8, 9 years worth of that history into a file group, and then have that file group be on a piece of cheaper hardware. Maybe you have your main database on SSD, and maybe this is on old traditional rotating media. Something along those lines, where you've got something cheaper where you're putting this. Obviously, with archived data, if you're looking at 2009 data, hopefully that's not going to change. And if it's not changing, then it could be a great candidate to put into its own file group. Move that file to cheaper storage if it doesn't get accessed frequently, and potentially save some hardware costs as far as tying up space on your expensive disk. Another thing is that I believe there's one more slide into this later. You have the option of doing file group level backups, and with the file group level backups, you're able to back up. Let's say you've got a 1 terabyte database and or maybe 10 times that size. You could, if you need to, back up the full database on the weekends, and during the weekdays you could back up most of the file groups, but just leave out the file group with the archive data and not worry about it, and come back and get, because the archive data isn't changing, come back and get that later on the following weekend.
Excuse me, Aaron. There's like a humming in your microphone.
Okay.
Sounds like water running.
Don't know if that'll help any. Alright, so monitoring data file usage. This can be important, obviously, for a DBA database person, but even for an ETL person, this can be extremely important. You could have an import job that is you thought was minimally logged, and turns out it's not minimally logged. And being able to take a look at the database file sizes before, during, and after is going to be able to give you insight into, are you using up a lot of space that you don't need to be? Once you've got the data there, is the data being queried? You can move. There's lots of different options. I'm trying to not dive too deep into any given one, but here are some of the ways that you're able to monitor the data file usage, and knowing which tables, which data files, which indexes are being used are really important, because if you're maintaining an index that's 10 gigs and no one's using it, then why are you maintaining that index? Maybe no one's using it for 29 days of the month, and then day 30 rolled around and all of a sudden it gets used. Maybe that doesn't need to be sitting around all month, or maybe it does. Maybe it's there's a large amount of updates at the end of the month, and you might as well just if you only need the index then, you could investigate that and potentially just create it then. I've got a brief story I'll share with you on one of similar scenarios to that a little bit later on. We're also going to talk about just touch on partitioning here in a little bit. There's some really great features to partitioning. And, if you've got a single table that's maybe over 10 or 20 gig, it might be a great idea to partition that. Depends on how your queries are, but could be a great feature for you to use if you've got Enterprise Edition. These are just some more pieces of information for you all to have on your file groups, your data files, and how they're laid out, how much space they're using, things like that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but leave this slide up to people take a look. And you've probably heard of most of these, but you may not have heard of one or two of them, or may have forgotten that you can use it. So that's why we included these. Then there's SysDM OS volume stats as well. That's another way you can monitor space. Enough of that, and let's move on to data compression. I'm really a big fan of database compression, both at the backup level as well as in the table, the partition, or the index level. Let's look at those options. You've got word level compression, page level compression. Those are things that you can do to a table. You can do to a partition of a table, or you can do to an index. Running at the, if you've got a table that has, like I said, 10 years of data in it, maybe it's 100 gigs or something, especially if 90% of that is old, or 80% or 70%, could be a great idea to partition it. If for whatever reason you're not comfortable with partition just yet, you want to spend some more time before you get into it. If it's not a table that is accessed heavily, the compression options, page level, word level, could be something for you to look at. Especially if this is a table where you'd love to have all this data in your dev environment or in your test environment so that people can query it and test and make sure that their queries run before they promote them to production. Being able to turn that on for the whole table might be good. It might be better that you partition it and then only compress some of the partitions, but compressing, especially once you're above the 20 gig level on a single table, that's something I'd suggest you take a look at. Backup compression is something that I frequently use. I use in all my PowerShell demos, actually. It's a really good thing. Ever since, I think it's SQL Server 2008 R2, I think it got included in the Standard Edition at that point. Turn the default setting on your SQL Server to go ahead and compress your backups even if you're on your local machine. But if you're on your test or dev and you only back up completely and frequently, but maybe right before you deploy a new version, you're probably going to delete the backup anyways, but you're backing up just in case. Probably a good option in those scenarios to go ahead and just turn backup compression on for the entire SQL Server. In production, I don't want to say it's a blanket, yeah, no problem, don't worry about it. It's probably a good idea to be using backup compression. It speeds up how fast the data file gets written out, speeds up how fast it can be read off the disk and then reassembled up on the SQL Server. I've had great experience with it. Don't want to go so far as to make a blatant statement of it, but tell everyone to turn it on. But in my experience, I've had great outcomes with backup compression. if you, one warning, if you create, I believe it's partitioning, and I believe version, if you do any of these enterprise level features and then you restore your database onto a SQL Server that is standard edition and not enterprise edition, you're not going to be able to restore your backup if you've been using a enterprise only feature. So be aware of that. It's just some more information about row level compression. Makes more rows fit onto a single page. It's like zipping up your data, especially if you've got data with lots of repeats, where it's like, especially in certain data warehouse scenarios where 5 of the columns are likely identical, and then 11 of the columns are maybe not identical, but they're all similar values that you're choosing from dimensions, and the dimensions are kind of tightly packed. Can save you a ton of skips. Enough on that, and trying to be a little mindful of the time and not spend too much time on here, but the one thing about compression is obviously it's going to take CPU to go ahead and compress your pages, compress your rows. I've seen scenarios where even though you have that overhead of compressing a row, the fact was on larger queries, they may have just been waiting for disk the whole time. And in that case, it may take, let's say, 3 minutes to run. And 2.5 minutes of that entire 3 minutes is just waiting on more data to get up there. In quite a few scenarios I've seen where the CPU of the compression and decompression completely has been offset by the fact that the data gets off the disk so much faster. Sure, it may have to uncompress it, but then it's done, and it can finish the query, and a query that may have been running at 3 minutes could be sub-minute just by turning on something like compression. And then again, you're saving space in your backup files. You're saving space if you copy your either all or a portion of your database to your dev environment, your test environment. Space saving is all right. Here's some guidelines on when to use compression. All right, a little bit more about it. It's not available in every edition of SQL Server, at least that's the last I knew. Really important point is if you compress a table, the non-clustered indexes are not, the non-clustered indexes are not going to be automatically compressed. So if you've got a table that's 10 gigs, just the data, and then you've got 7 gigs worth of indexes, and then you compress the table, you might get that original 10 gigs down to, say, 2 gigs. Your indexes don't inherit that. They're not going to automatically compress. You actually have to tell them to compress. In which case, you have a 2 gig table and you have 7 gigs of indexes. You now have 3 times the size, more than 3 times the size, of indexes as you do raw data in the table. That's something you want to be aware of. Compress those indexes as well. If you're a little leery about compressing the indexes because you're afraid that might be a penalty as far as CPU performance, and you're going to the index and you want it to be fast, so you don't want it compressed. You can make an argument for that, but I'd say, look at partitioning that table, and on older partitions with older data, compress those, compress the indexes of those, and on the newer index, you want to leave that uncompressed, then go ahead and do that. But at least you don't have to have the entire 3 years, 5 years, 7 years worth of data uncompressed, especially if you're not in all of it, if you're only getting the last 2 years, year over year, or the last 3 years, something like that, you still get a benefit out of compression if you partition it and only compress the indexes on older partitions. Some related procedure, SV data compression saving. Probably heard about that one before. This partitions, if you start partitioning, you'll want to become familiar with that. SysDMVD index operational tasks. Are your indexes even being used? Find out how many scans. Do you have an index that's on there that's not even being used? You're paying a penalty to update it, but you're not actually doing anything to, you're not actually reading from it. Taking a look at the time, I'm going to switch over to transaction log files. I'll just be very brief on this one. DVCC log info will get you your number of virtual log files. Take a look at, you get your LDF, and that's what we're representing here. And inside of there, you've got virtual log files. If you've got thousands of them, that can be a bad thing. DVCC log info, it'll spit out a row for every single virtual log file that you have. If you left your setting at the default, or your setting for growing your transaction log was grow by 10 megs or 15, 100 megs, you could have hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of virtual log files. If you do, that can be a concern. And one of the ways that you correct that problem, when you've got a window where you can do this, you're not going to impact a lot of other people, is to shrink down the file and then grow it back in, but grow it at 4 gig chunks or 8 gig chunks. Kimberly Tripp has a great post on this on her blog. I don't frequently have to worry about my virtual log files. I did once a couple months ago, and in that case I just found her blog, went back, read the instructions on how to do it the right way, shrunk down the log file, grew it back up, and everything was great. I went from having 5,000 or 15,000 virtual log files down to having just a handful of them, a couple of handfuls. And again, that tends to happen when you have a process that ends you up with a huge LDF file, and it was growing in small increments along the way. Another way of doing it would be adding a file one file on a different disk, and then eventually getting the current one to stop being written to, shrink it down, and then eventually remove it during the maintenance window. Okay. More than one way to skin cat. Alright. I can cover 2 more topics before we get out of here. TempTD, really important to your performance. In fact, it's critical to your performance. It's great to have TempTD on its own set of disks. It's great if you got that kind of flexibility, and if you do have it on its own set of disks, you want it to be one of your best set of disks. You want it to be your major league set of disks, not your minor league set of disks. TempTD is used for a lot of stuff. If you're working in ETL, you're probably going to be using TempTD at various points in the process. TempTD not only for temp tables, you know it for table variables, but it's got quite a few other things where it gets used. So to set the stage for everyone, make sure everyone's on the same page. SQL Server blows away TempDB every time it restarts. Or if your TempDB got corrupted, it's going to start back up, and it's going to go ahead and try and create a new one, and it's going to go from there. So it always starts with a clean copy. It's copied from your model database. So if you've got things in your model database and they suddenly show up in your TempDB and you're wondering how that happened, now you know. Your configurations, you can have more than one data file for TempDB, and I actually recommend that. Depending on your situation, there could be a case to have one data file in TempDB for every data file, or it could be just, if you've got an 8-core machine, start with, if you only have one file today, start with 4, and bump that number up to 4 and see how things go. See if you think you need to add any more, and you may not. Operations in TempDB are minimally logged. You can point that on up before you go on to the other thing. I'm sure everyone's familiar with the pound with the single pound temporary tables. Not going to go over that, but obviously that's stored in TempDB. The table variable at table name, those things are stored in TempDB. When you work with cursors, it's going to put its data there. Internal objects created by SQL Server. Sorting happens in TempDB. If it can't read if the index has the data that it needs, but it's not in the right order, because you set order by some other column, then that sort's going to take place in your TempDB, and that's why you need to do that. If you're running snapshot isolation, the versioning for that is going to recommitted snapshot isolation. If you're not familiar with that, the versioning of that is going to take place in your TempDB. And also on line index operations are going to take place over there as well. Recommitted snapshot isolation level can really be extremely useful. If you turn it on and performance actually starts to slow down a little bit, take a look at your TempDB and see if it's got enough data files there to be able to keep things running along. And if you're running Enterprise Edition, online index rebuilds are a great thing. I recommend that people use it. I've seen quite a few people that have Enterprise Edition and never use it. And definitely want to recommend that people use it. And be mindful at the same time, of course, that's going to take place in TempDB. So you have another reason why you want to have lots of fast storage, or a requisite amount of fast storage for your TempDB. Alright, here's some more information about version store. We've only got a few minutes left, so I'm going to not belabor this point. Finally, I'm going to use some resources to be able to look at your file usage, space usage, sessions, everything, and how much I/O is going on. Alright, and monitoring performance. I'm going to have to blaze through here a lot faster than I had intended to. Sorry for taking so long on some of the other topics. Here are a list of things that you can do to monitor performance. One thing that when I go out in the field, I see not many people using is actually a Windows Performance Monitor, and it's great. Windows Performance Monitor, you can set it up, have it collect data, and basically act as your black box for the non-SQL Server stuff that you may be interested in, and you'd like to have that data, and by the time you find out, man, I wish I knew what the CPU was like, what the network I/O was like, what the this, that, things that don't, pertain to SQL Server. It may be too late. You can set up data collectors to track these performance counters for you constantly, and then just have them similar to a black box overwrite as they get too big. Going to go through this very quickly, but this will actually grab SQL Server counters as well. So don't want to make it sound like it only does non-SQL Server. It does all of them. But this can be a great thing for you to know what else was happening on the box when you ran into a performance problem. Some best practices for it are to capture data by using the .dlg output files. Set a maximum size. You don't want to run your disk out of space just because you were trying to capture some performance counters, and then you didn't need the files, nothing was going wrong, but in the meantime you managed to run your server out of space. You don't want to do that. Sample entering polls can be as low as 2 to 5 seconds. Sometimes that's not ideal for certain counters, and for certain counters, some of them, they're not going to get updated frequently enough, or there's not going to be enough information changing to have it all the way down to between 2 to 5 seconds, so maybe just once a minute is more ideal. Obviously, each time that it updates, it's going to take up more space, so be mindful of that. And you can set these up. To run continuous. Right, so extended events. Not going to be able to dive into that. We don't have enough time. I want to point out, if you've never tried it before and were maybe scared away when we first saw it in SSMS 2012, starting with that version, there's a add-in to SSMS to make it a little bit easier, to at least let you get started a little easier. So that might help you sort your way around a little better. Sorry, I'm skipping over some of these, but I just got to get on to one of the last things that I love for performance. Actually, 5 minutes left. Data types, I'll just touch on it real briefly. Make sure you're using a small data type. It helps. The smaller the data type, the less space you're using up, not just on disk, also in memory. Simple as that. Data types come in families. Some family members are smaller than others. Here's an overview of the options in the date and time family. And then here's what those ranges would be for whether you pick date versus date time versus date time 2, and so on and so forth. Bulk load mechanism. This is the last one that I wanted to make sure I covered. This table I found out on the internet. We had a resource link to it. Great information if you're moving data into your SQL Server, whether it be with SSIS or with something else. I knew a lot of the information when I first saw this this little table of information that I've got up here on the screen, but I didn't know all of it, or even if I did know, I didn't always, I didn't remember all of it. So let me just switch over to some information out here. Is the one that I have been referencing recently. Data loading performance guide that was on SQL Server 2018. This is wonderful information about how to more quickly load information into your SQL Server. How to minimally log things if possible, and what things need to coincide to be able to make that happen. So there's a lot of information, real wealth of information here. So definitely recommend taking a look at that if you haven't done so already. Information about how to minimum log when you're importing data can be very, very, very useful. And looks like we're pretty much out of time, so hopefully that information is useful to y'all. And if you have more questions about any of that, please hit me up on Twitter or shoot me an email.
We can take a couple minutes. I have some questions. There's a request for the URL for the presentations by ITSIC.
Okay, yep, it's solidq.us/webinars. Let me put that in the chat pane. I don't know if I can do everyone. Put it in the chat pane, so Sharon, you should be able to see it now at least, and if you can share that out with everyone, that would be great. Doesn't look like I have no question list here. More questions?
Yeah. There was a question, where do you launch the SQL PSX from? But Cheryl then wrote she downloaded and installed it, so she may have answered her own question.
Yeah, once you open up PowerShell import modules and just type SQL Server, once you've installed it, it'll find it.
And when you were talking about the file groups, there was a question, does this apply to SANs or only to physical servers?
Definitely applies to both. Whether the storage is direct attached or is on a SAN, it applies to both.
Do you recommend 1 temp DB per CPU core, even if you have 48 cores?
Probably not. At that level, probably not. Obviously you'd have to take a look and see if it makes sense. I wouldn't be able to, at that level, I wouldn't be able to blanket recommend it because that's a lot of overhead to have to manage, and it might not be giving you any benefit. So, probably not. But maybe.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Aaron. I have just one more task, and that is to announce today's raffle winner. Again, we thank Dell for making these raffles possible. Today's winner is Bruce Lee, and he's at tyco.com. And Bruce headquarters will be in touch with you and get in touch with you and send you your prize. Everyone, thank you very much for attending. Join us in 2 weeks. We'll have another talk. I've forgotten the name of the presenter, but we do this every 2 weeks. And I thank you all for coming to this one. And I'm going to end the meeting. And the recording will be posted at dba.sqlpass.org.